Okay, we're good. All right. Okay, looks good. So, if I remember correctly, last Wednesday we left off finishing with the play age, the school age group, um, and we talked about industry versus inferiority and how this is where children start to learn that not only does their actions, their behaviors, and what they're developing skills in um, um, matter to themselves, but it also has industry or value to other people. So we start to learn that we can have this bartering thing going on where I provide something valuable for my friends or whoever, and they can do the same back. Okay. And then we talked about inferiority, and that's when it seems like nothing the child does seems to have any value whatsoever. And therefore, they develop what's called inferiority. And we talked about how this was kind of used as one of the first early theories of bullying. But there has been some challenges to that because there's been some highly industrious individuals who have engaged in bullying behavior, and so that theory kind of breaks apart at a certain point where we need to later on talk about different other ways to think about why is it that children engage in bullying behavior. And if we did the social psychology component in this class, we'd have a little bit more time to discuss that. Okay. The next stage that we should talk about is adolescence, which usually begins with the period of puberty and goes through until we become what's called a young adult or a matured adult. Okay. Um, and there's some things that we do need to recognize before we kind of go on that kind of break the mold that we usually think of an adolescent as a person around the age of 11 or 12, and it lasts until they're about the age of 18, because we're seeing some things in culture that are known as cohort effects. Okay. A cohort effect seems to be what's called a generationally specific thing that hasn't been seen in older generations. Okay. So, for example, if you would have taken this class, let's say 30 years ago, um, which sadly, I think when I took it, we would have talked about how puberty is an event around the age of 12 is when women have their first menstruation and young boys are able to, young men are able to viably impregnate a female. Okay, and we would say, okay, 12 is that. We'd set the what's called the psychological maturity at around the age of 18, because that's when we see back then, that's when we could see individuals become independent from their primary family, those types of things. Okay. Now, um, some changes that you all should be aware of, because many of you are in the generations who will be looking at this much closer and much deeper, is what we have seen since about the last 35 years is the age of physical maturity, which we would call puberty, has started to get younger and younger, where the age of psychological maturation is getting older and older. So there's a widening gap between physical maturation and psychological maturation. Okay. And indeed, there has been cases that they're not common, but there has been some cases where I believe the youngest a girl who has gone through menstruation, I believe was the age of 4. This happened about 10, 15 years ago. When I worked in the field of child sexual abuse, the youngest girl that I worked with that was impregnated by her abuser, she was, well, she was 7 going on to 8. And well, no, she was 8 because she gave birth at the age of 9. So that's that timeline. So we have noted that this age has gone from 12 to about 10 is about the average age now, and is getting and the widening spread of the distribution is getting wider. Okay. So we have that to note in these generations for about the past 35 years. The other thing that we have noted is that it's taking longer for psychological maturation. So I'm going to give two definitions of psychological maturation. One is the sociological definition. It's the ability for someone to live on one's own, to support themselves, support their family, to pay their rent, to go to work, and manage their life as an adult. Okay. So that's kind of a sociological aspect of what would, especially in Western societies, what psychological maturation would look like. Um, on the psychology end, we look at rational decision-making abilities, okay? And probably one of the best analogies that is kind of simple and kind of easy to understand is that let's say you have $50 in your wallet. It's Friday. You're not going to get paid till next Friday, and you're at the mall, and there's a shirt that you really, really, really want that is $50. And I mean it's just gonna make you look amazing. Okay, let's put it that way. But the issue is that Monday you have a power bill that is $50. Okay, so you're not getting paid till next Friday. So you have a power bill, but you really love the shirt. Okay. In the most basic version of this analogy, a psychologically immature mind would go ahead and get the shirt and try and worry about the power bill later on, borrow the money from mom and dad, do whatever, do something to be able to just purchase that shirt, that impulse shirt buying right then and there. The psychologically matured person would go, okay, I can't get this now. I need to pay my power bill. And so they would not get the shirt in instead deciding to take care of their adult, as you would say, responsibilities. Okay. So no matter what definition that you use, or whether you think it's about decision making or you think about it as being able to live independently, we're seeing this age get older and older. Okay. This is where I want to be very cautious because there's always a distribution. So this is not everyone. Okay. There's plenty of very young, mature individuals in this world. So I don't want anyone to think, oh, well, if you're under the age that I'm about to say, that might be you. It may not. Okay. But I just want to put that out there. But the average age over the last 35 years has gone from 18 to 26. And recent research is actually suggesting 27. Okay. But there is also a gender difference in this, is that over the last 35 years, women have been able to mature these feats by the age of about 21, where men, it's taking little bit longer. It's about the age of 34. So there's quite a large gender gap, but that's where we get the overall average age of about 26, 27. Okay. So this is a situation, the kind of cohort thing that is something to ponder and think about. Because these are very recent findings and whatnot that we're looking at. Psychologists and sociologists don't have a real good explanation of why this is happening, but physical maturation seems to be getting younger and younger, whereas psychological maturation seems to be getting older and older with the progressive generations. So I would encourage you to kind of think about that and maybe be the theorist someday to explain this. Okay. But let's get back, regardless of those two dynamics. Let's get back to what Erickson felt was really the core aspect of adolescence. Okay. And to kind of understand why he felt this way, I want to kind of give you a kind of something that psychologically occurs while a child is going through puberty. Okay, is they start to recognize that their body is physically changing, that it's becoming its adult form. And so with that, they also start to think of things like, well, I must then be changing. I must be different. Okay. And probably again, the best analogy that can be done is if you ask a prepubescent child who they are, they're most likely to say something like, "I'm Joe and Ann's son." They'll do some type of relation thing with their family. They'll say, "Oh, I'm a son. I'm this. I'm that." They may also include that I'm a soccer player and all of those, but the major part of their identity is identified with their family unit. Okay. When you ask someone who is post-pubestic, most for a good portion of the time, they won't bring up necessarily their family relations. They'll say something like, "Well, I'm a soccer player, or I'm good at math, I'm a rock star, or something like that. I'm an influencer." Um, and so they won't necessarily make the identification with their family that primary thing that is developing in their identity. Okay. Now, with that being said, there are some caveats to this. This is where an adolescent is just really testing who they are and really coming to solidify who they are independent of their family. And so peers are going to become more and more important in children's lives. Okay. Now, given in some rural areas, siblings are your peers and cousins are your peers. So I don't want to say there's a complete disconnect from family, especially when we get more into rural areas. But it's largely a development of seeing what my peers think becomes more important than what my parents think in a sense. Okay. So they're testing out this identity they have and they're using it within each of their peer groups to really figure out who they are. We should note, though, that things like personality, attitudes, um, uh, self-esteem, all of those things, they're set by about the age of 5 to 6. In fact, one of the best predictors of whether someone will go to college is their attitude towards school at the age of 5 and 6. Okay. And so it kind of emphasizes that point about this really identity and who someone is personality wise is really set at a younger age. It's just in adolescence, you're really starting to develop those aspects of yourself outside of the basic family unit. Okay. All right. So the next thing we really should talk about is what would be considered a healthy identity versus this thing that Erickson called role confusion. Okay. And the first place to start is just to give a definition of what is identity. Okay. And it was William James, the father of American psychology. I think I mentioned him in the beginning of the class, who coined a couple terms for us. First, he was the first to use the term self-concept. Okay. Basically, a self-concept is everything that you can say is you as a human being. So, we could always start with age, gender, race, but it also includes, the shoes I own, the car I drive, the company I keep, the house I live in. Everything that defines who you are is your self-concept. The other thing that uh, James gave us was another term, which is kind of popular, and that's the term self-esteem. Okay. Self-esteem was coined by William James to provide an understanding of how someone evaluates who they are. Do they like themselves? Do they not like themselves? Okay, so these are two kind of terms that William James provided us with. Within the within the self-concept, William James divided the self into two different. You can replace this word with identity, self with identity. Okay, he believed that we have two aspects. We have our social self, which is everything that is given to us by our social world. Okay. So again, we could look at things like gender, uh, sibling, employee, student, teacher, um, anything that has really I identifies you that wouldn't be there if you didn't have a social world giving you these definitions of who you may or may not be. Okay. The second type of self, James originally called it the spiritual self. Okay. Or now in more modern times, we use the term personal self or personal identity. Okay. The personal self is everything that is about you that sets you apart from the person sitting next to you. So you may have, for example, a social self. Maybe you're both socially identified as women. So you're two women sitting next to each other. Well, we all know that those two, if it was just defined by their gender, uh, they should be acting similarly, but we know they don't because there's personality issues. So personality fits in here. The way a person expresses emotions, a person's temperament, a person's attitude and belief system about certain things and places and whatnot are all aspects that even though you might have the same gender social identity, you both are different based upon all of these different other factors. Okay. So these are the kind of two selves that were originally proposed. Okay. Now let's go to what is the difference between a healthy identity versus that thing that Erickson called role confusion. Okay. Well, if we look at this other wheel that looks like a bicycle wheel kind of thing, I'd rather you think of it as a pie. Someone with a healthy identity has multiple identities. So let's just put in here, let's say we have a young adolescent who is a daughter and she works on being a daughter, let's say a sibling. Um, let's say she's maybe good at soccer. I'll put SO for soccer. Maybe she considers herself a good girlfriend. Okay. Maybe she's really good at math. And these are all areas of her identity that she focus on. Maybe on a personal level, she has a kind disposition about her. And then there's two others that we'll just do one and two as examples. And she works on all of these. And you might be asking, well, why is this a healthy identity? Okay. Well, let's say this person, their boyfriend breaks up with them. And so that's going to now damage this idea that I'm a good girlfriend. It's going to challenge the good girlfriend identity. Okay. But because she has so many other areas, she could say, but I'm still really good at soccer. I rock math. I'm still good with my siblings, my brothers and sisters. Me and mom and dad are really close. And you know what? I'm really kind. And I also have one and two. And so they are able to salvage their self-esteem by having all of these other things that they identify as and work on. Okay. So this is kind of why in research we find that people who have multiple types of identity tend to be healthier. They tend to have higher self-esteem. They tend to live health. I think I already mentioned live healthier, more social, more because when those identities get damaged, they don't feel completely worthless. Okay. So now this goes into role confusion. All right. And I'm going to draw another circle. And there's really two types of role confusion. Well, use your imagination. Um, the first type of role confusion, I like to think about a college that I worked at where I ran their behavioral health center. And this college had a football team, but they had a unique recruitment strategy. Okay. Because they weren't an A1 school, I mean, it was a community college football team. They knew they couldn't attract the best of the best, but they could attract the best of what you would call the worst. Now, let me tell you what I mean by that. What they would do is they would go recruit football players who were excellent at football, but they were being kicked out of the university or college they were going to for either academic reasons or behavioral reasons. Okay, so you have these individuals who are going to come here, and this is going to be their last chance to make it in their football career. Okay, this is really kind of the dead end if they don't, and so if they don't get back into an A1 school by the time they're done with that college, or if they don't get drafted by the NFL, their football career pretty much is over. Okay. And so I can't remember the seasons when they do the drafts and everything, both for college and for NFL, but it is at different times. I just can't think of them right now. But I always had to make sure that I set aside time for that period of time because what would happen is that many of them would not get into that A1 school or they wouldn't get that draft notice from the NFL and they would start what we call decompensating. They would start entering into high risk behaviors, high risk drinking behaviors, criminal behavior. They tended to start to get aggressive and assaultive with their partners and their friends, and they started to really decompensate. Okay, and I would bring them to my office, and I would go, "Why are you? What's going on? What's going on?" And the major thing is that their only identity that they ever had that was either given to them by themselves and or their family was counting on them to be a football player, they were counting on being a football player, they never imagined doing anything else. That one identity was crushed. And I'd ask them, well, what about what you're going to school for? And they're like, that doesn't matter, I just was doing that to play football. Alls I am is a football player. That's all I was meant to be, and now it's gone. It doesn't exist. Okay. And so these were young men who were very difficult to work with, to try and get them another sense of identity. And sadly, many of them just went back to their homes. And as one of the coaches put it, they'd sometimes go visit them and they would be just on the front porch, usually unemployed and not doing much with their life. Okay. Which was what the coaches observed by doing some follow-up with them. Now, I'm going to tell you that's not all of them. There were many football players who also were focusing on their academics, getting their business degrees and whatnot. And so when the football thing fell through, they were able to go beyond that. And there were a few who, even though football was their only identity, after a while they developed a sense of self through other avenues. So it's not an all or nothing type of thing. I just want to explain the first version of role confusion is when an adolescent feels like that identity that they're holding is their only worth and their only value. Okay. And that in and of itself is crushing when then that identity becomes damaged in some way. All right. So that's one version of role confusion. The second one, and we'll draw another circle here, is when you ask an adolescent and stuff, who are you? And instead of saying, oh, I'm a football player, soccer player, I'm good at math, I'm good at academics, I'm a good son, daughter, blah, 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 they say, I'm not this, I'm not that, I'm not, so, I'm not a stoner, I'm not an athlete, I'm not a nerd, um, um, I really don't like my family, blah, blah, blah. And you go back and you say, well, who are you though? And they do the same repetitive thing. Well, I'm not this, I'm not that, I'm not. So this is someone who lacks any type of identity. They know exactly what they don't want to be, but they don't necessarily know who they're going to be or who they are as an individual. And this creates role confusion because then they get into these individuals with this lack of identity tend to not do well in intimate relationships. They tend to have the highest quit and turnover rate with jobs. So on average, a job is held to about 4 to 7 years. These guys are changing jobs every 6 to 12 months. They don't think anyone except them is the right. You can almost sense a piece of narcissism within their personality, but it's because they really just have no clue of who they are as an individual. Okay. So this is what we're hoping adolescents come out with is a strong sense of identity, who they are, and confidence in who they are. Because the other two versions can lead to some major life problems. Okay. All right. So now let's go down and let's go from adolescence into young adulthood. Okay. And again, if nothing changed in the person's life, you can probably imagine that this person on the left side is really set up to have a healthy, intimate relationship. They know who they are, they're autonomous, they have initiative, industry, identity, and that allows them to engage in relationships more easily. And I should mention, why is young adulthood for Erickson intimacy versus isolation? And I always say this, if you take a young person between the age of 18 to about the age of 27, men by this age think about it every 90 seconds, and women think about it every 2 to 3 hours. And that's sexual intimacy. Again, those are averages. There's people who think more or less, but that's kind of the average for this age group and how often they think about engaging intimately with another human being. Okay. So those earlier periods, and then if again nothing changes in the individual's life, they're really good to set up to have healthy intimacy, meaning they're going to be able to have good communication skills, they're going to be more understanding, they're not going to lose themselves in a relationship, those kinds of things. Okay. What about on our opposite end? If we feel mistrust and shame and guilt, we feel we're inferior, we really don't know who we are, or we think we do, but maybe not quite so much. This is going to set the individual up for what is known as isolation. Okay. And when we're talking here, we're not talking about physical isolation. We're talking about psychological isolation. Okay. And this comes again in two forms. The first form is where a person puts their attention to and their intimate energies into something non-human. Okay. So this is where you get the young person who's a workaholic. The person that we want to do the stereotypical, it's the dog man and the cat woman, where they put everything into their pets instead of human relationships, or the individual who invests heavily into their car or something like that. And what they're really doing is avoiding then the perils of human relationships. Okay. That's one version of role confusion. The other version of role confusion is a person who really, really, really does want an intimate relationship. They really do want to be loved and they do want to care. Okay. But for these individuals, they get in a relationship and in about 3 to 6 months, they dump the person. And sometimes they're already looking at other potential intimate partners. But once they dump that person, it's like they get right into another relationship. And then another 3 to 6 months goes by and they dump them again. Okay. And now what's going on in these situations for this individual? Well, usually, hey gang, I will be right back. I need to run and grab something really quick. I'll give me about 2 minutes. Sorry about that. Didn't take as long as I thought it would. I apologize for that short interruption. All right, so getting back to our individual who's getting in and out of relationships. Um, what is happening here from a most basic perspective? Well, usually when we start dating someone, we don't always present our honest self, who we completely are. We usually try to provide the best version of us. Okay, so if we go through this, so you go over, let's say, boyfriend, girlfriend situation, you go over to her house for the first, several weeks, maybe month or so. And every time you go over there, the dishes are done, the bed is made, it smells good, laundry seems to be cared for. Um, and then what starts to happen after that first kind of honeymoon period is that humans really are horrible at trying to always hold in our not so quality um, traits or what we would consider more natural traits. So we go on, 2, 3 months, and then all of a sudden you go over and dishes aren't done, the bed's not made. Um, you're sitting on the couch watching a movie. One of you lifts up a butt cheek and lets out a fart. You notice, maybe they don't brush their teeth as often as you thought they did, those kinds of, and you start to see, I don't want to paint an ugly picture, but what you're starting to see is reality, the reality of the person, the true them. And one day you're going home and you notice there's an extra key on your keychain. You go to your bathroom and you notice there's another toothbrush in there and whatnot, and things are becoming real. Okay. Well, if you think of someone who is mistrusting and shame and guilty, feeling inferior, and doesn't know really who they are, that reality becomes very, very scary. And it creates a lot of anxiety, sometimes depression. And what do you do when you have anxiety and major depression and all the, you escape it, you leave it. Okay, but you want love so bad, you leave that situation and are already kind of looking at what your next one will be. Okay, so that's the second version of isolation that kind of Erickson identified. And again, I just want to remind everybody in the classroom, we are all somewhere in between these. Uh, Many of us, I'll tell on myself, I'm somewhere between intimate and isolation. I do good on some things and horrible on others and whatnot. So I just want to note that we're all somewhere in between. Okay. All right. So that's that age group. Let's go on to the next. All right. Middle adulthood. We go through what um, Erickson called generivity versus stagnation. Okay. What is this? Well, sometime down the line, when we've developed our intimate relationships, we have our career, we have life going on, we're going to hit middle adulthood where we're going to kind of go, okay, what has this life been like? Okay, what is it about? All right. And again, I'm going to give the two kind of ends to this. For one group of individuals, they're going to look back and go, you know what? I've been married for 25 years. I have a really good job, a really nice home. I have one kid in college, the other kid is graduating high school, and life has been good to me. All right. And so, what's this person going to do? Well, if life's been good to me, it's time for me to give back to life. And this is where generivity, if you think about generous, wanting to contribute to unity of life. So we do know that a lot, and in kind of some of the more sociological evidence for this is that we do know in middle adulthood is when a person is most likely to um, um, uh, give money to charities. They're more likely to give more time to their church or their religious community. They're more likely to get civically engaged by going to city hall meetings or becoming city hall officials or elected officials and those kinds of things. So that's kind of what Erickson kind of felt like generivity is about, is that point we get to in our life where we look back and we go, okay, life has been good to me. I need to give back to life. Okay. Now, I will tell you one of the difficulties of Erickson's findings on this is we don't really find that people who are truly successful really give back. Um, One of the things when I consulted for charities and non-for-profits, they all are tried to go after the big donors, the big corporations, the wealthy communities, is where they would focus most of their fundraising strategies. However, what most successful nonprofits have come to realize is that your efforts are more likely to be successful if you focus on low income and low middle income people for your donations and for your thing, because they're more likely to donate to a given charity. So it's actually one of the difficulties with Erickson's theory is in real life, people who have experienced struggles are more likely to give back. So that's kind of a one of the challenges to his theory. But what we do know is that during this middle adulthood age is when a lot of individuals do look back. If we look at, for example, individuals in their late 30s and 40s, this is the age where most go back to school, where they try to change their career and do something else. And so we do know there's this reflective period. Okay. Now, on the other hand, there's the stagnation end. And so I'm going to give the kind of the horrible version of the stagnation end. A person's looking back on his life And he goes, Jesus, I'm on my fourth divorce. I'm unemployed. I've gone through 8 jobs in the past 3 years. I live in this cruddy, broken down apartment. My son is in legal problems. My daughter decided to drop out of high school. And uh, just life sucks. Okay. And life has not been good to me. Life hasn't given me chances. And this is where a person goes through stagnation. Okay. And again, there's a couple versions of stagnation that we should talk about. The first one is where a person evaluates that and their life goes, they want to know what did they miss in life that made their life so miserable. Okay. So this is where you're going to get the stereotypical midlife crisis person. So this is where you're going to get the 40, 50-year-old man dating 20-year-olds and buying a hot rod. This is where you're going to get the 40, 50-year-old female who goes and gets a body lift and a boob job and those kinds of things to figure out what in her youth did she miss that has gotten her to where she is now. Okay. The other version of stagnation are individuals who then deeply get into mental health and addiction issues in late in middle adulthood, and we find that often they have major mental health issues, some developmental illnesses, and this is where we have that difficult population. Okay, and what are these individuals going to end up doing? Is they're really going to wreak havoc on their family systems. By the end of this period of time in their life, either type of stagnating person has either lost their family, lost homes, lost careers, lost opportunities. But there are a few, and there always is some that also get out of it. They're the ones that go back to college. They're the ones that go get treatment. They're the ones that go and do things to make it so that they can get out of this stagnated mode. Okay. So this is the difference between generivity versus stagnation. And then let's get into the last part of life according to Erickson. This is late adulthood. Okay. One thing that we start to notice, especially as we age, especially when we start getting into our 40s and 50s, but definitely in our 60s, is we realize that humans are not immortal. We've had enough death in our families. Usually by the age of 65, our parents have passed away. Siblings are passing away. Friends that we once had are passing away. And we come to the realization that life ends. In our earlier years, we don't necessarily think that. We think that we'll survive this world. We don't think of death very often. But as we age and we start seeing it around us so much, we come to the realization that, holy crap, this life does come to an end. Okay. And another thing that Erickson felt that we go through during this period of time is really defining immortality and legacy. Okay. For Erickson, immortality isn't the physical body being immortal. It's whether or not we exist in the minds of other people when we pass away. Hence, all of the great figures in world, such as we could go with Jesus Christ to in Western society, George Washington, JFK, Martin Luther King. They all exist because we remember them, right? And so it's that remembering that keeps us actually immortal or beyond when we're here. Okay. So what Erickson felt like is we go through an evaluated period, kind of like we did in middle adulthood, where we go and we say, all right, I lived a good life. I had 2 really good marriages. My kids come visit me still. I did that thing at work that forever changed the way things are done in my industry. Um, and I've been really successful with friends and everything else. This is a person that's going to end their life with what's known as ego integrity. This is the individual who will stay active in their life well up to the end of their life. This is the person who's going to still engage their social world and their family and be a part of life still. Okay. And then because we're kind of getting on time here, then there's a person who has despair. So this is the person who is sitting in their older age going, none of my family ever come and visit me. I never really did significant things with my job. I never was able to hold a stable marriage. And this is a person who then is going to pass with despair because they know they're probably not going to be remembered very long after they're not here physically. And so, in the most basic term, this is a person that shows up to the nursing home and just waits for death to come. And so, this is kind of the what Erickson kind of theorized. Okay. All right. So let me just give some concluding remarks about Erickson's model. This model works very well with Western European and United States um, findings and what people in these two cultures experience. However, I would say that these kind of change based on culture. Okay. So not all individuals, for example, in Eastern culture will go through what we see as industry and inferiority. They will definitely experience identity development differently and at different ages. Um, and same with intimacy and generativity and stagnation. It depended upon the culture determines when an individual will go through these. And in some cases, in some cultures, they don't last as long either. Okay. So if you look at, for example, some of the more Eastern cultures, the intimacy component usually comes at the end of the development of the relationship instead of at the beginning, like what we see here in Western societies. Okay. So, and we could probably add other conflicts given the cultural context that the person exists in. But this is kind of again, one of our first life span theories. So it was worth taking a look at. So I'm going to stop here. And so we've gone over three theories.